A mic runner come around. I think what we'll do, Charles, is take like 3 questions around the room, see how our time is, and if we'll get to any more. Ask people to please identify yourself, who you are, who you're with, and we follow something called Jeopardy rules here, where you please ask your question in the form of a question.
Brett Fortnum with Inside U.S. Trade. With the do no harm in mind, what is the practical impact of eliminating the energy chapter if the U.S. position is that, well, it's covered, the provisions in the energy chapter are covered by other elements of the agreement? Could it be consistent with the do no harm principle, or what is the worst case scenario if all of a sudden Chapter 6 is gone?
Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I'm not saying that if you take out the chapter, you're going to do harm to those provisions, but I'm not sure if the chapter has worked well. If the chapter has a consolidated space for energy, provides some accent on energy, if it provides a framework for modernizing and adding elements within that framework, I'm not sure why you would want to remove that, both for substantive reasons in terms of profile and ease of adding elements to it, and plus, as I mentioned, the political optics of removing an entire chapter leads one to believe that maybe it's being removed because there were some problems. And then again, the American position is to create a separate chapter on textiles when the Mexican and Canadian position can easily be made, well, you're covered in other areas of the NAFTA, so it becomes contrary logic. So again, we rely on the do no harm. If it's working, if the chapter was actually asked by the American side initially, you got to come up with a better explanation than it's just covered in other elements. Because we also hear, for example, that without a chapter, it makes it a lot easier for USTR to run the show rather than relying on interdepartmental consultations. So is it also an issue of domestic bureaucratic convenience? If it is, that should be secondary to the interest of the 3 countries when it comes to energy. So again, we think that it's worked, and if it ain't broken, we're not sure why you need to fix it. There are many other areas that I think are a little more controversial and require that modernization. And again, if you go to remove this chapter, this is exactly, I think, contrary to the do no harm principle.
So we have time for 2 more questions for this panel.
I'm Jose Diaz with Reforma newspaper from Mexico. This is for Mr. Gerardi. It's a similar question. Does the industry advocates for Mexico joining Chapter 6, or you feel it's okay at the moment the way it is?
Well, in response to that, and going back to what Sergio says, I would separate process from substance. And going back to the do no harm, look at the reality and the facts of where we are today. If we need to add a chapter, not add a chapter, let's not get caught up in the process side of it, but for, as Sergio pointed out, the implications of removing a chapter, adding a chapter, etc. What does that really mean to the broader relationship? So I'd take us back to the broader conversation. What you've done in Mexico over the past few years is not only historic, but it's very important for the energy trade in North America. By opening up your marketplace, the energy trade, you see the millions and billions of dollars of investment that are coming into the country, and it's benefiting both sides of the border. And to me, that's the most important thing to focus on here, because then you can ask the secondary question about the process, about chapters, etc. But to focus first on what is the objective we're trying to achieve. And if we're really focused on benefit to consumers, free trade of energy, investment, protection of that investment, etc., it brings us right back to what we have today. Pretty clearly, it's worked well. It's not perfect, but it's worked well. And so we have to ask the fundamental question, why would we reopen that and have conversations about removing chapters, withdrawal, etc., if the data suggests and shows us today it's worked very well for both sides of that border, both in the north and in the south. So I'd encourage us to go back and focus on that. If there's something wrong, if there's something that's not functioning, let's talk about it. So it need to be an amendment, a modernization, a chapter change, whatever. But let's not lose sight of the broader objective we're talking about. And all the data suggests today, the energy piece of this is functioning quite well. It benefits Canada, it benefits the United States, and it benefits Mexico. It's rare when you find a policy like this. So again, if it's not broken, let's not try to fix it for whatever reason and end up disrupting something that's demonstrated it functions quite well.
Sergio?
If I can just add, our position would be that Mexico, now that it is ushering in these reforms, should be a signatory to Chapter 6. And our understanding is that Mexico doesn't have an objection to signing on Chapter 6. So at a time when your third partner is ready to sign on a chapter, we're going to do away with the chapter as opposed to making it more whole. And I would underscore also, Charles mentioned, 30 states rely on Canadian electricity, or Jack talked about the integration with oil and gas. We should never underestimate for the political leadership what a chapter could mean in terms of impressing upon policymakers the value and importance of energy in the NAFTA agreement. In other words, if it's in a whole bunch of different elements, sometimes for those political leaders it's out of sight and out of mind, whereas a chapter accentuates the importance of energy within the North American community. So there's substantive plus as well as optical reasons why we would be a little poor as an energy constituency by virtue of losing a chapter, especially if other industries get a chapter, because it signals to the public a lessening and an accentuation on other things, and that at the end of the day also counts.
Just one point on the geopolitics of this. Mexico has just acceded to membership in the IEA, and the IEA policy principles are completely consistent with Chapter 6. So once again, I think it's more the political optics, if nothing else, that I would support in keeping that.
Thanks, Guy. I guess we're going to have to cut off at this point. Please join me in thanking this panel for their very interesting and productive.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you to our panel. We're not going to have a formal break. We're just going to transition to the next panel. So if folks can try to stay in their seats.